Alright, let's go ahead and get started, guys. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. We're going to do a lot of things today, I think. But first off, we're going to specifically look at some behind-the-screen stuff. It's, I guess, a series? I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, basically we're going to hop behind the screen with me, and we're going to take a look at what happened in sort of the last session of D&D campaign I've been running. So to kind of give new DMs and experienced DMs and GMs look at sort of how I run sessions, give you ideas, things, you look at my style and go, yeah, that's something I want to adopt, or you look at it and go, that's not something for my game. It's not what I want, and I'm going to do something else. You can learn from my victories, but more importantly, learn from my many, many mistakes that we'll make along the way. So let's just go ahead and jump in. This is going to talk about the third session. We just ran the fourth session yesterday, so I'm still putting notes together for that session. So I just wanted to take a look at it, bring you guys along with me. We'll take a look at it. So first thing, obviously, get it out of the way. if you're in this campaign, don't watch this part of the video. I'm going to talk about other stuff later that's not going to deal with you, but for right now, spoilers ahead. So you only spoil it for yourself. Doesn't matter to me, but you're going to see how the sausage gets made, which is not always the greatest. It's one of the things that we try to hide from the players. I think it makes for a better game with a little bit of showmanship, a little bit of illusion, where we don't show everything. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look. Go, I'm going to shoot on over. Oh, you know what? I'm going to need to set this up. Nope. Oh, it's good to go already. Didn't even do that. That's alright. So we're going to jump in. So this was ran it back on the 4th, and I titled this one specifically The Heavenly Pit, and that's sort of where we're picking up. So at the end of the last session, end of session 2, they ended up at this Peniel party in random hamlet without a name. We know that it has kind of a name now, but it didn't at that time. Yeah, it's Faroud Shadid. But that's sort of something I came up in between sessions because I need to do a little Google Translate foo to kind of make some anachronism of the language of this region of the world. So all the players and their PCs were in attendance for the Peniel party, and I just kind of go through what each of these players decide to do with their characters. Caleb decides to tie one on with Ratcatcher Sahar, which is an NPC, and we did get Ratcatcher Sahar is a confirmed lush, and the two of them get a little bit foolish. Caleb never having had any sort of ale before, so gets a little deep in their cups thanks to Sahar's prodding. Severin decides to take advantage of the crowd to cook a nice big soup, making use of their cooking utensils, and sells to the townsfolk and makes a little scratch for a little food to go with their penny ales. Sniz keeps an eye on Caleb's antics. Doesn't help. It was very clear. Sniz's player was very clear. He's like, oh, I'm not going to step in and stop anything from happening. I'm just going to watch them. So they're just keeping an eye on them. And Swain treated himself to some gambling and came away with about what he put in. He rolled pretty right down the middle. So nothing big there. He did, as he was talking with the NPCs, discover that the big temple he was looking for, that they're sort of interested in potentially going to, is not actually in... That should be Palais, not Parlay. Palais de Bertrand. It's not actually in that town. It is, in fact, sequestered on its own island just outside of the port of that town. So just a little bit where they learned about the world, and where somebody obviously from the big city that they're from said, hey, where's the temple? They would have said that the town was where the temple was, but as they get closer to the town, people can give you more accurate information to the PCs. Like, oh, well, it's actually not, it's not in the town. You got to take a boat to get to it, but it's nearby, like you could see it from the docks. Kind of thing. And Zarnok, our dragonborn slave fighter, Tries to pick up some additional info about the giants in the northwest that he's got a little hook in as far as a rumor, but finds out little. That's still many miles from here, and it's through the throat, through the pass, on the north side of the island and beyond. So the people down here in sort of the southeast corner of the island don't know too much about it, other than giants are kind of on the warpath. It doesn't get a lot of information, and is a much higher level adventure for them to track down, so if they go track down that now, they will immediately get stomped by giants, which is not what we want. We don't want that. So eventually, Zarnak also picked up some things, one of the rumors that we had put down last time, that they could, what the folk are doing, so I keep this little track you can see up here. What are the folk doing? Well, this one they're digging ditches, because they just rested overnight. And they said, oh, we're going to start digging ditches for the fields tomorrow. So Zarnak they're like, hey, Zarnak, you're a pretty big, strong guy. If you want to come help us, we'll make sure that you get room and board and a silver a day, because these are super, pretty poor commoners, so they don't have a lot to offer in the way of sort of monetary value. They can provide room and board pretty easily. Plus whatever information and other sort of intangible rewards you might reap from spending time ingratiating yourself with the local community. Eventually all the group, except drunk Caleb, whom they decide to force to stay behind, they go with Hakeem to discuss the stirred situation with Farouz Shadid's Rio, that's Del Rey, who they begin talking to. Zarnak, they pretty much let Zarnak lead the conversation, who is not the person with any charisma skills whatsoever. And Del Rey agrees to put together a suitable reward for them. She really wants them, she asked for them to go in and this came up in the session yesterday, she asked for them to go in and find the source of the Sturges, where they're coming from, and eradicate them if possible. Spoiler alert, they don't do either one of those things. At least not yet. Who knows, maybe they'll go back and do it. We'll have to see. But we'll talk about that in the Session 4 recap, not in the Session 3 recap. So, she also agrees to leave a favorable signature in Zarnak's sort of journey book for his, showing his, how do I explain it? I've explained it before, but for anybody who's new. So Zarnak is a slave who is going on basically kind of a Rumspringa journeyman kind of 2-year window in which he can go out and he is basically a knight errant for a mercenary company. And if he goes around and does enough good deeds and gets enough favorable reviews, once he comes back, the mercenary company, which owns him because he's a slave, will give him his freedom and the opportunity to become potentially a powerful, free person in the world, or at least in this area. And so this is actually very important for Zarnak, which is I think it's a little weird they welched so easily on the dungeon and decided to come back and kind of maybe not do that. But we'll see. So we have some suitable rewards. So one of the things I did is I just made up a little magic item, a consumable item for him, Shiari powder. It's one use for the group. It basically, you make coffee. You make a coffee-like drink that grants the benefits of the alert feat, the 2014 alert feat, not the 2024 alert feat, until the end of their next long rest. It means they're unsurprisable, they get +5 to initiative, and they grant no advantage to hidden foes. So it's incredibly powerful, one-use thing for the entire party. I'm not sure if I'm going to give that to them because they ended up, like I said, they didn't do the things that they said they were going to do. And then take a collection, so I just rolled some random coinage for our little hamlet, for Shadid. And they got 35 silver and 650 copper. That's essentially just 10 gold, but just in a much smaller currency because you're just getting it from people who are giving you a few coppers or maybe a silver. And then I did that, and then there's a built-in thing to be like, hey, if you go talk to the Zabet, the bailiff, he'll be able to exchange that for easier coinage to walk around with. So it kind of give the reward has a baked-in reason to go talk to somebody else about it. So, who can also potentially be another quest giver, who can give them something else, give them another person they can talk to about the setting, or get information out of, depending on what they want to do. So, nice and easy, and then after we do that sort of social RP scene, the party grouses with Zarnok agreeing to a job they don't really know the rewards of, because she didn't give them the rewards. She said that she would get them suitable rewards. And that may change. I may change that, because I have just as Del Rey does, I have the benefit of hindsight to take a look at it and be like, well, for what you did, what is a suitable reward? There was an unused local rumor that didn't come up. Nobody really talked about it. About the Irish Hell Cave style cave with a map to the unicorn. That's a rumor they could have gotten. I was thinking from sort of a younger, sort of adolescent girl who's kind of flirty and sort of love-struck in that young girl kind of way about the fantasy of a unicorn. But they didn't talk to anybody that made sense for, and I'm not sure that they would go after that. Yeah, but they might. So they settle in for the night. They come up. The group sets their daily con saves for their energy expenditure for rolling around. Severin rolled really poorly, even using luck. So Severin, we have a couple people in the group who have really struggled with the energy aspect and the exhaustion aspect. Severin is one of them, and Caleb's the other one. Caleb has actually been the brunt of it, but that's sort of changed paces here in the last couple of sessions to being more of a Severin issue. But they head into the jungle and they have no trouble finding the dead tapirs again, which was kind of the kickoff for this quest. From there, the group begins doing skill checks to pick up the trail of the sturges, hoping it will lead them to their nest. Sniz is our druid in the party and is the MVP there. They're able to explain more about the creatures, about sturges. They make some good nature checks. Where they lay their eggs, they know that that's in a usually still water of some type. And they find a trail of dried blood droplets coming from the proboscis of the sturges. And they use that trail. Swain uses jump to launch himself 50 feet up into the canopy for a better look, and sees an opening in the canopy they assume to be a body of water. And they're like, hey, well, there's eggs in water. And it looks like there's a big opening in the jungle over there. That's probably water. Then, despite the warning, Swain attempts to sort of brachiate, to do a Tarzan-style swing through the canopy. Really fails just spectacularly on the athletics check. And there's only so much you can do as a DM when your level 1 character decides to risk a 50-foot fall that's 5d6 of falling damage, which was for sure going to kill that first level NPC. Or first level PC. Didn't really decide to sacrifice some gear, which is something I've been doing in lieu of them taking damage. They have to give up something else. Some other sort of circumstantial sacrifice to me, the DM, and or the gods of the world. So they have to have some worthy sacrifice to save themselves from that hit point damage. Decides to take disadvantage and breaks his fall by staking a tree. He fails this sort of mitigating thing that he's trying to do to fall and actually falls. Quick on the reaction roll, Caleb dives over and slaps a resistance on Swain. Right before it's the forest floor, we recognize, because I forgot how resistance works. The resistance is you reduce 1d4 damage, because not just give you resistance to bludgeoning damage. So it turns out that, looking back on it later, is that it was, if we rolled the d4 and he rolled anything other than a 1 to mitigate damage, would have survived. If he rolled a 1, for sure permadeath for the character, because they took quite a bit of damage. And one of the things that we introduced during that session is that I want to stop this sort of pop-up, pop-down aspect of 5e, mitigate that a little bit. So introducing lingering damages, so whenever you get knocked down to 0 hit points, there's some sort of lingering injury that's not like hit point damage to heal out of. So we introduced lingering damage. Swain has broken femur, has pretty much permanently the slowed condition and disadvantage on dex saves until they get that leg healed, which is going to take some time. It actually uses our resource dice mechanic, except instead of rolling it daily, they roll it at the end of each session, so it's going to take a while. We just rolled the end of this session, did not roll a 1, so he's still at a 1d6, so femur's still an issue. The group decides to split up. Caleb drags Swain on a litter back towards the town, while the others continue forward. Caleb and Swain get lost. This will be a recurring theme, so they get lost pretty quickly, deciding to run off into the jungle without the one character who's trained in survival, which is the druid. Anyways, they get turned around, start heading the wrong way, so they just end up heading back. Unfortunately, it's just randomly which direction they actually ended up going. So, fortuitous, I guess, for me as a DM, that they just ended up walking back the same way they just left. Severances and Zarnog break through the undergrowth to find the wide, deep pit down to the subterranean jungle. They find some smaller moltings of sturges and kind of confirm that, it's likely they're probably coming down from the pit. The pit's about 500 feet deep. It's a huge opening. It's this massive sinkhole. It's heavenly pits. We talked about this, I think, a little bit last time. It's a real thing. Karst sinkholes in China. Look them up. They're neat. So it's very clear that they don't have enough rope to make it down in one go, so they're going to have to figure something out. The group decides that, okay, well, we'll just head back to town for now. They end up running into their other companions, and head back. Back in town, the group buys some supplies. Caleb and Swain go to see the local healer about, Swain's massive injury. Healer cleans up Swain's wound, resets the bone, provides a better splint, and gives him 1d6 poppy leaves to chew on for the pain. So, Swain's backstory has a bit of an addict tend to it, so we're going to have to see how this goes once he starts running out of poppy leaves. It's an opiate, a mild opiate, but still an opiate, so we'll see if Swain gets hooked on them. But we won't really know that until Swain starts running out of them. The group splits up into their previous pairings, with 3 staying overnight in the jungle. They decide to get a head start, even though it's not really a head start because the other 2 still have to catch up with them. So they go back into the jungle to sleep for the night. Severin beefs his cooking role for the evening. We're doing this camp duty system where it's like, hey, if you want to do something for the group, you have to make some sort of check. If you pass the checks, if more people pass the checks than don't pass the checks, then you're all going to get an advantage on the Constitution saving throw in the morning, because it's kind of representing morale, vaguely, in an abstract way. You don't have to do anything. Nobody has to do anything, and then you just roll straight. Because if you also fail the check, if you fail more checks than pass, then you have disadvantage. And that's just to be like, oh, morale's bad, or in this case, you cook some bad food and everybody's kind of sick through the night and into the morning, and throughout the rest of the day. So they have some Pepto-Bismol issues. So that is Spring Maiden 52, which is Fire's Day. The night passes uneventfully, nothing happens. The group reconvenes, makes their way back to the pit. Swain spends some time tinkering on jungle vines to put them together, basically braid them together to make an additional 50 foot of rope. They wanted to try to do more, but I told them that, there's the tensile strength of the jungle vines. That's probably not going to make sense. They're going to probably tear. You probably can't make anything longer than that. Zarnak ends up being the MVP by doing a 350 foot free climb descent, because everybody else goes down with the rope, and then Zarnak has to bring the rope down because they have to do it in 2 stages because they don't have enough rope. They get some extra rope, and they take some of the rope back just in case they need it while they explore this sinkhole, this massive sinkhole, but they do leave most of it there. Sniz, our druid, verifies that they do not recognize the exotic flora, so that we have exotic flora and some exotic fauna that are down here that they have never seen before. The daily con saves get put on hold as the group has actually entered the adventure site. They're in the adventure location now. They're in the dungeon, if you want to call it that. It's a wilderness point crawl adventure that just happens to take place in a sinkhole. So it is a dungeon, but it's a weird outdoor dungeon. The group follows a game trail through heavy jungle towards a flash of light and rumble of thunder. Sniz spots a strange creature dart across the path, furred with chitinous plates, long tail, and a human-like face. They recognize that later to be a carapace monkey. So a weird fork of monkey that's developed down here that has chitinous plates on them, as well as fur. They reach the monkey business area, which is area 1 of the dungeon. That's the first area of the dungeon. They see the dead monkey. They don't really put together what the dead monkeys died from. There's a big pool of water that the monkey's next to. I think that was a pretty big hint. And that and their medical check was okay, but wasn't stupendous. So I gave them the idea. I was like, okay, well, you can tell that it didn't die from starvation, didn't die from falling, and it didn't die from some sort of violence. But they didn't put together as like, oh, probably for poison and or disease. They didn't make that deductive leap, which is okay. Not important, just telling them about what's going on. If they decide to go after the glowing amber that's in the water, because lightning strikes the water, makes the amber glow at the bottom. That's a nice little hunk of treasure. They decide to go after it. They decide not to. Swain tries to pull it free with the mage hand, but it's too heavy, because mage hand can only do 5 pounds. So, the amber's heavier than 5 pounds. It's a pretty big piece of amber. Severin confirms the lightning is not creature-based. Didn't get a super great roll on that to determine that, oh, it's probably chaos-based. They'll find out about that later, though. In session 4, they found out that's the case. Deciding that that's nothing else to do here, they move on to the next area of the dungeon. They follow the sound of distant water, and they find a small stream, thinking that the water's going to lead them, of course, to the sturge nesting area. Their eggs. So they go to the area 2, which is the bodies piled like cordwood. They see an island, the body pile. There's a big black spear that's on the island as well, and surrounded by a bunch of sort of fetid water. They go out there. Zarnok starts wading through the water, and they're discussing. The rest of them start discussing on the shore. Start making a bunch of noise. There's a dwarf head that pops up from behind the pile of bodies. There's an NPC that's over there, silently urging them to be quiet. Zarnok sees something gray streak through the water at him, and the group rolls initiative. That's the end of that session. That was the end of session 3. So session 3 was kind of a lot of back and forth. It was kind of, they decide to do something, then they go back to town, then they decide to do something, and they kind of go back to town. It's a lot of in transit. So it can kind of it felt a little bit like not a ton got done, but that's alright. It's okay for them not to do a ton in the session, as long as they're having fun and it doesn't feel like they're crippled by inaction. So it's not the choice to do something, it's just that they're changing their minds as they're doing something, which is okay. It's slightly different. They don't have, I think their confidence is really low in adventuring right now because they've had some quite bad rolls in the beginning of the campaign that's led to some not ideal situations, to things like falling out of the tree, losing some gear over some really nasty situations, not having some good rolls to understand or perceive specific things. It's understandable. So part of that's on me. I probably need to find something that's going to be a little bit of a confidence boost for them. This session also went quite a bit longer than I was expecting. We played for about an extra hour because and normally I wouldn't do that, but I really wanted to press because this was our 3rd session. We hadn't had any combat, and because they waffled and went back and forth a couple of times and just didn't end up rolling a random encounter, kind of give them that piece. I should have probably just given them one just to get that first combat out of the way, just a little cupcake. But I followed the dice, and the dice said, "Not today, sir." So we followed that, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear that we were definitely going to have combat next time in the 4th session, because we hadn't had it in the first 3 sessions. So I pushed them even further to make sure that they at least got through that first area and into one of the other areas that had creatures in them that they could have a combat with. And so that way we could kick off session 4. I had them go ahead and just roll initiative, and they fought the Grey Ooze. And I'm just going to put the initiative down here. Just because I didn't. But this is where the Dwarf NPC was going. But right before Zarnok. Let's go ahead and bold that as well. But yeah, that's the session. So, feelings about it are... Yeah, I wish it wasn't as much back and forth. I feel like I maybe pushed too hard, a little too hard as the DM, that the world's a little too scary for them right now. So I need to probably back up a little bit, give them a few easy wins to get their confidence back, because I think that the first 3 sessions have really ground in that, hey, when you make... Just traveling around in the wilderness is really dangerous, and if you're not thoughtful about what you're doing, there are consequences to that. And I probably pushed that a little bit too hard. And it doesn't help that some people have, you know, maybe made them spend a little bit more money than they would have liked to. So I think that they feel like the world's probably got them pressed up in the corner a little bit. So I need to find some way to give them a little easy win, perhaps. So they'll stick with one of these. They won't either bypass the adventures, which they did in the earlier sessions, and this one they were like, okay, we're gonna go do this adventure about the Sturges, and then being like, actually, we're not gonna do this adventure about the Sturges because the first combat was really tough. But that's session 4 thing. So things are getting up at the session 3 house rules. So I'm kind of slowly rolling out some house rules as they kind of come up in the game. The resource die came up because Caleb rolled 1 on his 1d6, so he went down to 1d4 rations. We did random encounters because a random encounter came up. It wasn't a combat encounter. It was one of the non-combat, just kind of dressing encounters. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. So there's one more I talked about where Sniz runs across the monkey, strange monkey. That's actually just a randomly rolled thing that ended up make a roll for a potential random encounter between these different areas of these sinkhole jungle that they're moving through. So that was the one that got rolled up. It was just an encounter with local fauna. And I was like, alright, well, I know that there's these weird monkeys that are going to be in the next area, so I'll just give you that. But they have abandoned this. I don't want to get too much into it. Again, that's a session 4 recap, which will probably be next week. I like being just 1 week behind, because that means the first time that we end up not playing, because we have this generally a weekly game, I'll still be able to talk about something, so that'll kind of cover that over, which will be nice. Yeah, things are going okay. Progress has been slow in the campaign, and I need probably pick up the pace a little bit, kind of push them on the pace. They are still... I think they're unsure about themselves, and they're unsure about the world, because the world has been difficult to them. So like I said, I probably need to pump the brakes a little bit on the difficulty, just to give them and provide some cupcake opportunities, some easy wins, easy encounter, some easy treasure they stumble across, maybe a beneficial social RP scene that's going to have some sort of boon that's going to help them in the future. And if that's the case, maybe I do give them the Shiari powder. The Shiari, right, it's up here. Maybe I'll just give them this powder, and that's what they'll get for it. Maybe they won't get any of the money, and that will hopefully give them some confidence to continue adventuring and feel like they have they can do that from a position of power rather than a reactionary, the world's going to kill us kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's all about the session. The session went well. Lots of good RP back and forth within the party with the NPCs, with their one NPC straggler that kind of hangs out with them right now. He does quite a bit in session 4, so there'll be more about Cass coming up in this next one. But that's it. It was fun. I hope this was useful for you. Let's take a actually before I completely jump off the topic, I think I still have the prep sheet. I do have the prep sheet. So we can take a look at the prep sheet, and let's just give it a once-over to see what's maybe a little bit different. So, I rewrote it obviously in the document, but I do have the hard version of it. Alright, so this was the first session, of course, that we had everybody there. I have my weather in there because our druid player decided that they wanted to take the cantrip that tells the weather, and I'm like, absolutely, I have a weather hex that I basically never get to use, and this is a perfect opportunity for me to do it as part of the prep. I just rolled three of them. I think this is actually at the top of this document, so yeah. So I just roll 3, and I'm like, this is what the weather's like now, and as we go through the session, it'll change up a little bit. Unless I roll the same thing, like I did here. Yeah, I gotta introduce them to the concept of the homebrewed, like, penny ale thing, the private house versus the public house. That was fun. The opportunity to get an introduction to the Zabet, which is basically like a bailiff in the world, which is... How do you explain Reeve and bailiff? They're kind of like two people working together. A Reeve's a little bit more like an ombudsman from like a university or a college, so they're an elected person who represents the interest of the commoners under the Lord, and the bailiff is sort of the estate manager, kind of. They do a number of other things, but that's kind of how it breaks down. Well, that was that, which they may or may not go to. They built in the exchange collection, but they may or may not be getting that. A group of villagers request help to make offerings to the cat. I totally skipped over that part. They did not do that. They got kind of the person who I thought would be really interested in that, which would be Caleb's PC, the Caleb PC, but he was too busy being drunk at the party, so I was like, yeah, we're gonna skip over that. Don't need that one. We did talk about digging the fields. We missed the rumor about the unicorn map. We did our ration checks. Presumably the group is headed off, and then I spent a whole bunch of time last week making... You can't see that. I don't know why I'm holding it up. Menace of the Heavenly Pit, which is literally just making the dungeon they ran into. So, and most of that's going to get shelved now, which sucks, but I have a great level 1 dungeon for some other campaign down the road that I can pull out and use and not have to prep a full dungeon, because it'll be very easy to move it to essentially any biome for anything, because it's a sinkhole, so it makes sense. That thing will make sense in the desert. It'll make sense if I just change the type of trees in it from... Obviously this one is a very rainforest jungle, but there's no reason I couldn't change that to a normal sort of broadleaf forest, or even a pine forest. Sure, karst formations only are in certain places, but I don't think my players in any group I've ever been in, or probably will be, are going to care about that. That they couldn't technically happen. The sinkhole can't technically just happen anywhere. Instead, we could just hand wave that part. Or, you know, magic. Magic's why it happened. Some other things back here. We have some interesting fluff that I put together. I don't think any of this came up. No. Didn't run across any of these, so I'll save those for later. That's the nice thing about having these little, like, lists in the back. So I have an interesting fluff, which is just like, if I need something for them to run across, I can throw that out there. The NPCs... Nope, they didn't do any of the NPCs. No random encounters. they've been so lucky on the random encounter rolls. Like, statistical anomaly lucky. It's been very funny. Because they've only rolled 2 so far. One of them was the monkey that we just talked about, and one of them was the sturge from a previous session. So they actually haven't rolled into any combat encounters as random encounters, which is, there's a 1 in 6 chance that they will do that. And they roll pretty often. Hasn't come up yet. And they split the party. When you split the party, both groupings, the number of each individual group rolls for it. And they've just been very, very lucky. Which is good, because that would be bad. And they haven't really found any treasure. Just out in the world, because they haven't defeated any creatures to take it from. They haven't really gone searching for any. Or tried to steal it or do anything like that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness the rogue in our party or the grifter in our party haven't really just leaned into that and just become just absolute awful criminals. So it hasn't happened. Hopefully it won't happen. We'll have to see, because our confidence man definitely just scammed somebody. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We might have to introduce some karma next time. And then we have the Heavenly Pit. I do probably want to go over this in more detail. Maybe that is its own video. It's basically a 7-room, technically 8-room little dungeon. So that's about the sweet spot in dungeon size for me. I like a 2 to 3 session dungeon. I think that's the right size for me. In the way that I like to play, it's enough that it lasts more than 1 session, so it doesn't feel like you're doing a new dungeon each week if you run just a series of dungeons. Or and helps with the prep, where I can do 1 week of prep for 2 to 3 weeks of play, which is very nice. But it's also not so long that the players start to forget what they're doing there or what they've come across in there, because they only have to remember from the previous session, or maybe 2 sessions ago, which is usually encapsulates them getting there as well. Just barely getting into the dungeon. And so it really depends on how fast. Like, could you clear this dungeon in 1 session? Absolutely. There's a very straight path to the thing that what was going to be the thing that they were looking for in here, that I think takes 3 rooms. That's a total of 3 rooms to get to. So not even half the dungeon if you take a very specific path through it. They didn't take that path, but you could have done that, and then you could have just left. But there's a lot of other cool stuff in the dungeon to check out. There's this whole druid shrine. There's they haven't even dealt with the Fiend stuff yet. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. I'm glad to say that the Menace of the Heavenly Pit's going to be a fun adventure for me, dungeon for me to run sometime later. It's built for first level PCs, which is very difficult to build a dungeon for, I feel like. Because you have to give some non-combat options, or figure out ways to do combat that's not going to result in a lot of TPKs or a lot of resting in the middle of the dungeon. It's not as much a science, I think, as an art. I don't know if I could really teach somebody to do that. I think it's such an experience-driven thing. And having a good foundational knowledge of the rules and what characters are capable of, especially at first level, and what they are not, and being able to look at monsters and being like, this monster makes sense, actually this monster is, and that's a problem with the CR challenge rating system in general, is that it's not very mathematically sound. So it's just kind of a vibe. You just gotta have to feel it through an experienced hand. But yeah, the cool stuff. I just want to look at some of the cool stuff they could get out of here. Just for fun. Let's pick the standout. Let me pick out a standout. Because we talked about monkey business, and next time we'll talk about bodies piled like cordwood. What's a nice one to talk about? I don't want to talk about Peaceful Slope. Yeah, I guess we'll talk about Waterfall Shrine. So there's a gravel area that they can come across. So I do the room DC, so it's a DC 15 area. Waterfall Shrine, gravel area, which is a gravel drain. Overgrown with sedge, so lots of watery, grass-like plants around it. So it's very clearly overgrown. At the gravel center, there's a small waterfall that drops into a concave tree crown. So the trees kind of become a bowl for the waterfall that falls down into it, and then goes down over the tree into the gravel, and disappears and drains away. There are faded runes carved into the tree. It's druidic, so if you have the druid character with it, they can definitely read it. Otherwise, people won't be able to read it, but they will be able to recognize it's probably druidic. And if you can read druidic, it definitely marks it as a water shrine. And you can do like a druid or a history check to say that this is the common animalistic totem for water is the azure serpent, because rivers curl and wind through the landscape like big snakes. 20 foot up in the cave, there's a wall as an opening with spilling water. So basically where the waterfall comes from, 2 people could walk abreast, so it's about 10 feet wide. And there's a gummy sediment in basically where the water runs through. That's got a bunch of sediment that's deep mud that's kind of collected over the time, which gives you is just difficult terrain, so it gives you a disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. That's important because there's a trap that's attached to this, where that could be important. The passage ends in a carved serpent head, water dripping from its closed. Is it closed? It's slightly ajar mouth, just so you can see the fangs. And you see its eyes are glittering silver nuggets. There's an investigation check. You can see that the eyes are trapped with a balancing scale. I think if you look at the shrine, the classic shrine from the Indiana Jones movie, where if you want, it's like a weight thing, but you have to do 2 of them at one time because they balance out. So you would have to, in coordination, try to steal both things at the same time. And it's just a fun one because I made sure that the silver nuggets are of different size, so it makes it a little bit more complicated for them if they want to go after it. Should they fail to take it, the mouth falls open, and it turns out there's a bunch of dammed water that's behind that the mouth is holding basically at bay. It drops, water floods the passageway. This is where the mud comes in, where they have disadvantage on running away from the water that's streaming into the room, as it becomes a torrent that's going to wash them out of this channel. And they have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws to kind of throw themselves up against the wall in a way that, or brace themselves. Otherwise, they're going to get shot out and they're going to land in that tree and take like a d6 of damage. It's not a big deal, it's just kind of a fun scene for them. And then if that happens, they won't be able to go back in and get it because there's going to be just this torrent of water that kind of comes through. So they'll have lost the opportunity to get those silver nuggets. But yeah, so that was just one area that they could have dealt with, which I thought would have been a fun little exploration puzzle. If they go back, they'll deal with it. If they don't, they don't. That is the nature of being a DM, unfortunately, is that sometimes they just walk away from the adventure, and you go, okay. Yeah, so that's why I like a little bit more freeform, where there's not a heavy narrative influence, because you never know if the player's going to decide to do a heel turn, decide that they don't want to pursue that adventure anymore. So if I tied some weird, like, personal narrative to that, and they decide to go away from it, then I'd probably be a little bit more upset about it, because I would have been like, I spent a bunch of work on this, and this is important to your character, and I know that you don't know that, but that still doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel worse. But that's that. So, thank you guys for hanging out with me for doing this. We're going to call it there for this one. If you like this content and you want to understand more about the way that I prep games, or have questions about how to help your own prep, go ahead and drop those down in the comments. I'll take a look at them, try to answer questions, come up with ideas, share and share alike. If for some reason there's quite a discussion around something, or there's something that sparks my particular interest, maybe I'll make a future video about it. We'll have to see and talk about it more in depth. But that's going to be it for me. Thanks for hanging out. and I'll see you guys next time. Alright? Bye-bye. I'm actually, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to come back and do more. It's just I'm doing that to make it easy for editing for me later. But we will, we're going to continue on. We got some other things. Like I said, we got other things to talk about. We're going to do Revivifying Exploration next. So we'll just do a little lead in for the video, and then we'll jump in and start talking about that. Maybe we can bring some stuff up for that. I think that's mainly going to be a talking head video, but we'll see. I think we might need some visual accompaniment with that. Actually, I am almost out of coffee, so I am going to go pour myself another cup of coffee, and then we'll jump back in with the Revivifying Exploration. So hold on just a second. Alright, just about ready to come back. Just get this situated real quick. Hello. Hopefully you guys are doing alright today. There's that music's been on a loop. Let's mix it up. Let's mix it up a little bit. Let's choose let's do this one. There we go. Just jump into it a little bit. And just to mix up the sound a little bit. No issues there. Alright. So like I said, we're going to talk about Revivifying the Exploration Pillar. That's what our big talk is going to be about for this one. And then maybe we'll do the node-based travel. We're scooting along, so we'll try to get through this pretty quickly. I'm sure I could ramble about it for quite a while, as much as exploration is where my heart is when it comes to D&D, but it doesn't make for the greatest YouTube content to listen to me just ramble, so I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more succinct. We'll see how successful I am at that. So, I guess we'll get to see. I think we'll just go to chatting. I need to kind of show you what's going on here. Exploration in D&D, well, it sucks, doesn't it? It's not really good. WotC and the D&D designers have been selling us this sort of three-pillar architecture of gameplay, that you're going to have social and RP, that you're of course going to have combat, and then they're like, and then there's kind of the other stuff, and that's what we call exploration. It's basically anything. If you're not talking to somebody, and you're not trying to kill somebody, there's this other part of the game that, you know, is kind of whatever. So really think about it. Like, go pick up your player's handbook or your Dungeon Master's Guide and look for gameplay mechanics and rules related to exploration and social RP encounters, because there's not much for them either. In fact, there's probably more rules and specifics for exploration simply because of hazards and traps than there are for social and RP encounters. But exploration covers this massive thing, anything that's from dungeon delving to going across the overworld to coming across narrow alleys in the Byzantine labyrinth of a of a city and crawling through it that way. So it feels like we should, you know, focus a little bit more, have a little bit more support for it. So maybe you've kind of had the same issue I've had with exploration. In combat, that's like 2/3 of the rules of the book, right? But I've been playing a lot of years of TTRPGs, especially different editions of D&D, and the adventures kind of boil down to combat gauntlet after combat gauntlet are really boring. I don't like those sorts of adventures where it just seems like there are a number of encounters, and then there's this thin dressing of moving between one point to another point, and that's not really what I want. And that does make me jump to mind Pathfinder, because that was been a lot of my experience in Pathfinder 1 and 2. It's that the exploration's not really, and that's a table. Maybe that's fully a table issue more than the game itself. Especially because I don't really run Pathfinder, I only play it. Just because I'm not interested in running that system. Where it does feel like we're moving between combat situations at the point that even especially with Pathfinder 2 and the way that it's set up, that there's not even decisions to make in a given situation, whether that's combat or not. It's just kind of a matter of optimize if this then that statements, a little flow chart. It'd be like, if this is the situation, this is the thing that I do, this is the power or the ability, the skill that I use, the attack that I do, the flourish that I do, and it kind of boils down to that. And I don't love that. I think that variety is the spice of life, and it makes a huge difference in TTRPGs. And I want, you know, I kind of demand that my TTRPG experience as a player and a DM to be more than combat encounters connected by these Lord of the Rings style montage drone or helicopter shots and odd shopping sessions. Like, I need more out of the game than that, than just these bright glimmers of, and then some stuff happens and then we go back into combat. Like, There's so many things when it comes to D&D that WotC just doesn't provide us a lot of support with, hasn't really in the past, and it's kind of up to ourselves to take care of that, because they are clearly not going to do that. And I mean, they're too busy, right? We know that they're implementing some 5-year plan at this point to beat the NPC companions from Baldur's Gate 3, long beyond they're a dead horse, and they're just going to put it into anything and everything, because it's all about selling that brand rather than trying to make a particularly usable game, because that doesn't help their sales figures one way or another in the short term. But, you know, lucky for you, I know a thing or two about exploration, running that pillar, specifically the wilderness aspect. I don't often talk about it on the channel, but I spend a lot of time in the outdoors, especially growing up, doing a lot of camping and backpacking and orienteering and canoeing and sailing and rappelling or abseiling and doing a whole bunch of that sort of high adventure outdoors kind of stuff. And so I want to share some of that practical knowledge of that outdoor sports, bushcraft, wilderness survival knowledge, and inject that more into my D&D games. Use the areas of knowledge that I already have to help sort of revivify this D&D exploration pillar. We're going to come back, we're going to revivify it, we're going to make it an important part of the game again. And that's what we're going to get into. Oh, hey, how are you? And you designed exploration as an outdoor dungeon. Traps outdoor would be plants, quicksand. Yeah. Very much on the same page. We were just talking about the Menace of the Heavenly Pit, which is a node-based outdoor dungeon. Exploration kind of style dungeon, yeah. But very similar. Yeah, I think it's a great way. It's a very fast way to take, because we have probably the best framework that we have as dungeon masters or game masters is one of the things that we do actually get from the publishers of tabletop RPGs is generally how to make a dungeon. So if we can take that framework, that dearth of information, that, you know, slag of information that we have, and transpose it into a different setting, I think that's very useful. And use traps in the outdoors would be things like plants, quicksand. You can also just have traps in the outdoors depending on what you're doing. People set pitfalls, tiger pits, all sorts of weird stuff, falling rocks, if it's bandit camps or people trying to protect their land, or they're hunting for creatures. And then, yeah, obviously you have a bunch of natural hazards like plants and quicksand. I like to make a distinguish between those traps and hazards into whether there is an intent behind them or not. So hazards just are there, right? The traps have an intent, like some creature has created this situation to some end. So it's important, at least for me, to think about, okay, who set this up and what are they getting out of it? Which is the thing where it's like, if they fall in a pit trap, maybe that's actually for hunting a boar or something like that, and they just ended up stumbling into it. Or maybe it's specifically there to catch people. And why would they be catching people? And you spin that off and you go into follow that thread as far as it goes, and you've got yourself an adventure very quickly that you can build basically off of a basic pit trap. But yeah, very much in accordance to the way that I feel about it. So hop back in. So back in the old days, the 20th century, can you imagine? These pre-internet days, exploration was like the king of D&D. Like, that is what D&D was about. It was about finding dungeons, delving dungeons, mysterious hex crawls, especially confusing dungeons that were there to foil the mapper and make it difficult to find your way around and know where you were and get out, to make these basically death traps, kind of. Or you went the full gonzo mad mage dungeon where it's like, none of this really makes sense. This is just some sort of bizarre dungeon that's death trap that's made by a mad mage at some point. So they have a lot of that weird stuff from very early in the hobby, and then kind of came in with that Hickman revolution with things like Strahd, the Ravenloft module, Dragonlance, with this heavy emphasis turn towards more traditional narrative storytelling as we know it. The idea that everything that happens at the table, that happens in the game, should be in service to the almighty story, to the narrative that I have crafted as a dungeon master. So D&D kind of went from this weird fantasy wrapping paper rules around what it felt like was the fun of exploring the woods behind your house as a kid, to trying to write a great story around and despite the hijinks of your players, because it's hard to create a narrative structure when you have active agents that can do whatever they want at any time. And I think that is where a lot of dungeon master frustration can come in if you approach D&D from that aspect. If you're like, we're here to tell a specific story, and that specific story is one that I have headed, and you guys are all kind of like co-authors in it. I don't know. It's a strange way, I feel like, to approach the game. That's just my personal take. It's not like I don't like story in the games. I love having a nice, fulfilling narrative story. I just like it to be organic, that it comes from play rather than play being the thing that's kind of mucks up the works of telling the story. And I think that when I think about the wrapping paper rules, the fantasy about the fun of exploring the woods, it makes me think of that being the original seed of the idea for what became the original Legend of Zelda. I mean, like, oh, this is from Miyamoto thinking about his time exploring woods as a child, and then taking that feeling and trying to put it into an adventure game. Being like, okay, well, let me take some of the things that I know and kind of inject that back into my D&D game, so my D&D game feels, I don't know, I guess more like an adventure, like more like there's more going on, like that the world is difficult but manageable. And it's not necessarily about verisimilitude, but that is an aspect to it. At least it is for me. But it's also about trying to bring in my own other hobbies and interests, like history and stuff like that, trying to bring that stuff in. So instead of trying to think about wilderness as a place where we might do a travel montage, or just a spot that's between the dungeon and the town, let's focus on making it an integral part of the adventure in its own right. So you have start in the town, then the first leg of the journey is this sort of wilderness exploration aspect, and that might just be finding the adventure location if you want to do a dungeon. So it's finding the dungeon and getting to the dungeon, and then you do the dungeon delve, you get all your goodies, you come back out, and now the last leg is how do you get your goodies home, safe back to town so you can sell them off, you get that experience, you get your level ups and all the good stuff, get all your rewards for the adventure, as well as that always crucial level up and whatever rewards were promised to you, which should be alluring as well. And again, if it's a dungeon, you might come back with new threads of things to investigate, some new adventure that spins off in its own right, based off of new things that you learned in the dungeon. It's just great. I just want that wilderness piece, that getting there and getting back, to be a thoughtful part of the process, a part of the adventure in its own right. So I think the first way to do that is to increase doubt and shades of the unknown in the game world. By that I mean remove factual assurance. Stop giving the players accurate maps, or even any maps. It's been kind of a struggle in the campaign that I've just kicked off right now, that I've really been trying to not give them a map of the area that they're in, because it's an area they're not familiar with, so they're kind of leaning on the locals, and I want that to be... I want that to continue. I want them to feel like they have to ask people and interact with the world to learn about the world, rather than just have a piece of paper in front of them and be like, let's go here. And there's a road that goes there. Instead, trying to make it a more organic process. And it's gone well so far. There is some stuff, they do get lost. It does happen. They're not always sure where they need to go or how to get there, which is fine. And I'm okay with them kind of futzing around sometimes, and sometimes mishandling the bag and they drop it. It's gonna happen. It's okay. there might be some negative repercussions of it, but they shouldn't be just awful repercussions for it. And I also want to erode confidence in proximal knowledge. One of the things that I think gets a lot of dungeon masters, game masters in trouble, especially with exploration, is, but also in social scenes in general, especially narrative scenes. I guess, yeah, just social scenes in general, is that destroy this idea that when the in-character player characters, in the world player characters, are speaking to an NPC, that the NPC is going to give them always correct factual information. Because us having the conversation back and forth, me as the DM and you as the player, in character is different than out of character. So out of character, I'm talking to you as the player and trying to make sure that we're on the same page about things, about what's happening in the scene, the rules and mechanics at play, and what's happening. But in character, there's all the normal stuff that kind of comes up in conversation. People have different priorities, people have differing levels of knowledge. There is how willing they are to talk to you, how they feel about you. All these things kind of color. Do they have something to hide? Are they trying to make a quick buck off you? Do they see you as a mark? All that stuff happens in character. So just kind of separate those two. Make it very clear that, hey, when your characters talk to somebody in character, they have imperfect knowledge of the world. And sometimes when they give you, sometimes they'll just say, I don't know. Sometimes they'll give you knowledge that they've heard, so it's rumor and hearsay, which may or may not be correct at all. And if you ask about things that are far from their actual location, proximity-wise, so if you ask them, so in the campaign we have a character that's interested in following up on an adventure seed about giants on the warpath that's far to the north. And so they're asking people at the south of the island, hey, can you tell me more about the giants? And people in the south of the island, they are very removed from that situation. They're like, we've heard about the giants are on the warpath. We have basically heard the same thing you have. And they can't give you any additional information. Now, as we get closer, they might have heard more rumors about what's going on, which may or may not be correct. And the only way to do that is to verify whether that information is correct. So you can totally go off on an adventure under incorrect knowledge, and it's my job as a dungeon master or game master to continue to make that a fun and fulfilling adventure. To be like, oh, you got here and that's wrong, but maybe you found this other thing and maybe that's cool too. And maybe you adventure that, or maybe you find this other adventure seed that you decide to latch onto, another hook that's out there that you latch onto while you're midway through this adventure, and you decide to hop from the rails of one adventure to a different adventure, and you start pursuing that. As player characters, give them a lot of agency in character to do what they want whenever they want to do it, in a relatively relatively manageable way that keeps me sane as dungeon master and game master, which is definitely what I want to do. I don't want to get burned out trying to prep an entire world because they could do anything at any time. So don't want that either. We want plenty of freedom, but there are lines for them to follow if they want to choose those lines to follow. So the next thing is to talk about, for kind of making the wilderness be a bit more of a thing, is information and prep are incredibly important, and I need to specifically relay that to the characters. Hey, you need to figure out the direction of where you're going, the distance of the location you're trying to get to, and how do you identify it's the correct place. So in this world, we're talking about like landmarks, how many hours or days of walking will it take, are there any barriers from that path other than directly as the crow flies. You know, is there do we have to do a river crossing at some point, and that means, well, we got to find a bridge or a ford to get across it, or come up with some other way to get across the river if we want to expedite that process. Start thinking about that route. What does that route look like? This is where you decide to give them a map. Maybe somebody makes them a hand-drawn map, but then I wonder, depending on who you ask, somebody has to have seen a map of the area before, or else it's such an old thing, because it's to explain, because if you are a younger person who has always grown up with geolocation in your pocket all the time, you've never probably had to do this, where you have to ask somebody for directions to a place. And they either give you an itinerary, which is like driving directions. Hey, turn right here, turn left there, go straight for a while until you see this thing, and then do this. Which is the general way of getting directions for travel. Or have somebody basically draw you a map, like on the back of a napkin or something like that, to take with you and be like, oh, I need to look for this landmark and turn there. Okay, and then that means I'm in this area, so I should be able to find the thing I'm looking for. So, very different. And then the route of which you're going and the mode of transportation you're going to use. So, instead of that river, maybe instead of crossing that river through a ford or bridge, maybe you're in a city that's also along that river, and you're like, well, maybe we can just get a ride on a boat, or buy some boats and sail or row our way up there and paddle our way up there and just get out on the other side of the river. And maybe that's faster, maybe that's easier, it might be more expensive, but it might save them because they're not walking the entire time, so they might be more prepared for a fight when they get there. These are all considerations. So just that's what I want, is I want them to get to, my players to get to like that chewy nougat part of exploration and be like, oh, look at all this stuff that we can play with, all this stuff that's a consideration, these choices that we make about addressing the challenge that is just getting to the place that we need to, or finding it in a lot of circumstances. So once you have sort of the distance and directions in your mode of transport and the route, you have an expected time on the journey that'll give you an idea of how much supplies you need to bring and things of that nature. Also consider the biome. Is this going to be in a forest? Is it going to be out on the plains? Is it in the middle of a desert? Are you traveling through a swamp? All these sorts of considerations that you might want to think about. Okay, what is sort of the flora and fauna situation of that? What kind of challenges are there? You know, hazards, adversaries. What's the terrain like? Well, maybe we have a gnome or other sort of short-statured people in our party. Going through something like a marshland or swamp may be extremely difficult for them because the water's going to be too high. Where for medium-sized and larger creatures, that might not be much of an issue. So something they need to consider, as well as just the general weather itself. Oh, well, there's a lot of rain in the forecast. How are we going to deal with that? Is that going to affect the river? Is the river going to surge? If the rain's heavy, is it going to flash flood on us? Is that a challenge that might come up? All sorts of cool, fun, just silly little things, just everyday things that makes life a little bit difficult, that's perfectly manageable with some planning and thought, or something you have to deal with along the way if you don't foresee those problems, either because you can't or you decide not to spend the time to do that. Neither of those is incorrect. It's not like there's a wrong way to play D&D in this sort of aspect. Just I want to focus on, okay, you guys decided not to really spend some time thinking consciously about the journey that you're about to go on, which is perfectly fine. There's just going to be some challenges you're going to have to deal with as you go along that route that you might have to run into, and you're going to have to improvise a solution while you're doing it rather than the planned solution. Same thing happens, just different approaches to it. It's your game. That's your part as the player, is you get to decide how you want to address that. If you're a planner, you probably have some ideas and you're thinking about that pre-planning stuff, and that, you know, alights the fun parts of your brain. Or maybe you're more of an improviser and you want to just react to stuff as it comes up, and that lights up your brain, and this allows us to do either one of those aspects. Other things you might want to consider is party numbers and splitting gear, bringing in, you know, who's going to carry what stuff, so that gives you an idea of where they might need to be in the marching order. What happens if that person falls in the river? Well, if they have all the food, probably all the food's spoiled. So that's not great if they're carrying all the food. So thinking about things like that. As well as, are you bringing any guides, some support hirelings, people to watch your animals and vehicles if you have those. Dogs to watch the camp, a guide to get you to where you're going, presumably, if you hire a good one. All sorts of things. Maybe you have porters who are carrying stuff for you. Link boys you hire somebody to basically just hold the light for you which is very common. And then you might want to do some emergency planning as well. So what happens if we get lost? What happens if the party gets lost? What happens if somebody, like it's happening in my campaign right now, what happens if somebody gets hurt? So in that session 3 of the current campaign, you can go watch the sort of behind the screen thing where I talk about that. We had somebody fall from a great height, and we're doing some lingering injury. So if you get knocked down to 0, you take on a lingering injury. It's kind of trying to mitigate a lot of the 5e pop-up, pop-down design, especially in combats, where we only heal people when they fall down, so that way they pop back up, and they're just as useful when they're at 1 HP as they are at 100 HP. And that's still the case, but there is some sort of mitigating factor, which is the lingering injury. Because right now they have somebody in the party who's got a broken femur, because they fell from 50 feet in the air as a level 1 character and should probably just be dead. But instead they've got a really nasty injury from it. So now they're like permanently slowed. Okay, well that adjusts the speed of how we go. If we only brought enough supplies for a certain number of days, and now it's going to take us twice as long to travel, that becomes a new challenge or issue. And then what happens if they just get stuck? So as a good example is the Heavenly Pits adventure that I was running, and you descend 500 feet into this pit. It's like, well, you could technically get stuck down there. You might not be able to get your way out. I don't know what the circumstances would be for that, but there is always an option that they could get stuck. Maybe something to think about. Make sure that you tell somebody in town that you guys are going out on an adventure, and if you're not back in X number of days, then maybe, if you can, send somebody to come look for us. Call the president if we're not back by dawn. Alright, so that kind of gives us some ideas right off the bat for info and prepping and that sort of stuff that happens at the beginning. And then I want to transfer and talk about when you're actually in the wilderness, actually doing the things, doing the exploration, trying to find your way, cutting your way through the heavy jungle or whatever it is. And we're going to lean a little bit on the rule of threes, which is a survival rule of thumb, which is that a person can only survive 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water. I screwed that up. A person can only survive 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. And that's it. So we can take this and look at that framework and be like, okay, what are some obstacles, hazards, challenges that I could throw at players to deal with that? One example for 3 minutes without air is I ran a dungeon that had a subterranean entrance, so you had to, or an underwater entrance, so you had to swim through this narrow sort of cavity to get into the chamber on the other side of this cave system. And in the middle, it's a long swim, and in the middle there's a pocket of air that you can breathe from, and then you can make it to the other side, no check required. So the nasty hazard is about to come up. So there's a party of 4. First person goes up, gets a little air bubble, goes next. Second person goes up, gets a little air bubble, gets in, and they're in this dark cavern. They're busy trying to figure out how to get their wet torches to light because they just swam through water, so they're not thinking too much about it. Third person goes down, they swim, they go, and they get the last little bit of air, and that's all the air that's in the pocket, and make it to the end. And then you've got that last person. Whoever decided to go last, they now don't have that air pocket, and they have to make an active constitution check to see if they can. I'd let them do athletics if they wanted to, or constitution save, whatever. Sometimes I like to give them options depending on how they want to address it, so that way they can use something they're not terrible at sometimes. And they have to swim the whole way, so they have to make that check. If they don't make that check, they start sort of actively drowning. And it's up to the people who are on the interior, if they don't communicate that that's going to be difficult to the last person before they set off, they have to keep an eye. That third person needs to come up and be like, hey, there's no air back in there. Did you guys use the air pocket? And if everybody's like, yeah, we use the air pocket. Oh, well, there's no air. Ooh, and turn around and look at it and wonder if that fourth person's going to come up, or if they have to go and like try to grab them and save them somehow. So, very simple. 3 hours without shelter, that's probably the one that comes up the most. It's the easiest one to do. That's things like Rime of the Frost Maiden, where you have a bunch of outdoor things to deal with extreme cold or extreme heat or rain or anything that kind of addresses it. That it might be storms, it could be wind's a big one. Anything that would protect you, which is usually like the sun, heat, precipitation, trying to stay dry, those sorts of challenges that you can throw at them. And then they have to think about, okay, did you guys pack something like tents? Well, no, we didn't pack tents, because tents in 5e 2024 don't really have any mechanical benefit to having a tent. So unless we make one. So this is a situation in which we make one. So they could do something like that, or they could use wilderness survival to put together a lean-to, make sure that they can make a fire to stay warm and dry out their clothes and all those sorts of things. And shelter does a lot. We'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. And then 3 days without water. Water's usually not a concern. Water's pretty... I usually treat water and rations together. Usually just... The only time that I won't do that is if they're in a very specific place where water's hard to find, because water's pretty easy to find in most places, especially if you're willing to dig for it. But if you're running across something like a desert where water is notably scarce, then I might track water as something different than food. And then food is just a thing you track, but I also consider, hey, did you guys get wet? And then I use resource die, so rather than using tick boxes for things like rations, to track that, to add in a little abstraction for like, oh, well, this, you know, the bread got mold, or the cheese got moldy, the flours got weevils in it or got wet, the meat's gone spoiled, those sorts of things. Be like, sometimes the food just kind of goes bad, or animals get into it, or like I said, you get it wet, or it falls out of your pack. That also happens. So doing that you can also make that an important part too. So there's all these different, as DM I think of it this way, is like I have this entire smorgasbord kind of in front of me of different things that if I want to challenge you, I can pull it like a lever on an organ in front of me. Be like, I have decided, or I think in this appropriate situation that this could be an issue for you guys. So let's pull that and see how you guys deal with that real quick. And they don't have to be big, grand things that you throw up. They don't have to be these gigantic obstacles that are multi-part. They can sometimes just be super simple things like crossing the river and seeing if you get washed away. That's a thing that could come up, and that's a bad thing. And water in general is a bad thing. Don't mess with water. Next thing is, we touched on it a little bit with the tent, is to make that gear matter. There's a lot of gear, especially in 5e and 2024, that doesn't really have a lot of mechanics side to it. You can buy stuff like whetstones, like bedrolls, like tents that don't really have a lot of mechanical benefit. Often neither does the difference between having a torch, a lantern, or a lamp, even though those are very distinct things that do very distinct things. They do things very differently and have different issues of their own. So I want to, when I think about the gear, have challenges that they address and new challenges that they can create. So just as a broad sort of container of ways to think about it, categories of ways to think about that. Containers and packs. Well, what happens if your backpack breaks? Does anybody have the mending spell? Does somebody have like leather working supplies? And they can make repairs and things of that nature. Do you have I like using multifunction tools in my campaign, especially if I'm playing a PC. My favorite one is a crate tool or a box tool, which is this combo hammer, crowbar, and hatchet. So rather than carrying my character carrying a hammer or a mallet, a crowbar for opening doors and whatnot, and a hatchet for whatever wilderness survival stuff or breaking down doors, I can just combo those all into one thing, and I'm like, this is a very cool, feels adventure-y to me. Like, of course I would take this one utilitarian tool with me rather than 3 different tools, or only one of those tools. Why would I take one of them when I can take all 3 together? And each one has a totally different function, because there is a reason that there's a mechanical reason you want to use a crowbar in the game, because it gives you advantage on strength checks. Hatchet's going to give you options for doing things in the wild and making a big distinction on cutting tools between weapons and tools, because you're not going to want to use something like your sword or your dagger for cutting firewood. That's something, or your battle axe for cutting firewood. You want to use, because that's not what they're built for. That's not what they're good at. And you're going to duel your axe chopping down firewood instead of using it to chop flesh. So we kind of want to use the thing as they're used. Having cordage on you, rope is that everybody has rope. That's very important. But also think string. You can buy string and twine and have that, because there's always reasons for that. Like, one of the things that comes up in adventuring gear often is things like a bell. Well, you can't really hang like a little hand bell on a thick thing of jute rope. So you need... But if you have a little string, you can do that. And you can cord it through that bell and make a tripwire with it, which is the mundane version of the alarm spell. So it's a thing to consider. That you can do lots of neat little things with it. Give you tools for the players to be creative and clever in their use of. Also consider what you're going to do for light, and don't let your players get away with dark vision. Is like essentially blind sight. Blind sight's a totally different thing. If you're in the dark where there's not any ambient light, you can't see. I really wish that they, in 5th edition, instead of calling it dark vision, they had just called it low light vision, which is really what it is. It just allows you to see further in low light situations. It's not actually dark vision. You can't actually just see in total darkness, which would be blind sight, which is a totally different thing. It's some confusing nomenclature that only exists because it's been in D&D for a long time. So think about the light situation again. You can run out of light, fuel, torches get wet, a gust of wind comes by and knocks it out. All these things that are an important part of exploration and can lead to very poor situations, ambush situations. Ways to add that sort of exploration into combat if you want. If you get into a fight in like a kobold warren, and the kobolds are actually more tactically looking at how do we take the advantage away from the larger creatures. Well, they need this light to see stuff, because maybe some of them don't have dark vision in the group. And so if we take out the light, then we'll all be on the same footing, which is not good for attacking, and they can go and rely on their trap making skills for the player characters to bumble into in the dark. Just one way to kind of look at it. Temperature regulation, what are they doing for clothing? Can they make fire? Can they make a shelter, or do they have shelter? What does their sleep system look like? Which is just a fancy way to be like, do you have a bedroll? Because if you didn't bring your bedroll with you, you might not be comfortable to sleep. You might not get a full rest. You might have to make a con save or something. I might make you make a con save to see if you make it through the night comfortably. And clothing's kind of weird in D&D, especially 5e. Is that we introduce things like there's cold weather clothing, and there's probably some hot weather clothing, and they do give you a mechanical benefit, but they're often not used at all, even in cold areas. And you kind of have to go out of your way to find it in the book and be like, this is the thing that I go out of my way to buy and carry with me. Especially if you're doing something like encumbrance, and be like, is this worth it? But also rewarding the players when they take the time to do this prep, because they know, oh, we're going into this desert area, let's get some desert style clothing that'll help keep us cooler as we're walking through the desert. And be like, yes, that's a very good idea. You're going to get some bonus to the wilderness exploration. Probably mechanically. I'm probably going to give you advantage on some con saves, or maybe on your resource die for water, because you're just not expending as much water as somebody who wouldn't be wearing those clothes. I can find a different mechanical benefit, but give you tie the choices that you make, especially in that exploration area, to some sort of mechanical benefit. Water filter system, how do you get water? And how do you make it clean and potable? I don't usually go on that one too hard, but if they're like, oh, the only place to get water is this algae-filled pond, I'm gonna be like, alright, how are you cleaning that water? Because your characters aren't stupid, and you know that you need to strain and boil it, and probably have an ash filter if you can do that. And just explain that stuff. They don't need to know that as players. I know that as the DM, so I can add that aspect in. But I can make you guys make a survival check to be like, how well do you do it? That's what the checks are for. It's do you know how to do this, yes or no? And if you do know how to do this, how well do you do it? Because bad water is going to make you real sick. And I would use things like sickness, disease, and illness to make things a little bit more difficult. And then one of the last things that you kind of want to bring that doesn't get brought up a lot in D&D is some form of entertainment. As somebody who's done a lot of backpacking or long trips, it gets real boring real fast. There's not that much to do, so having some sort of entertainment, whether that's a musical instrument, dice, playing cards, some sort of story you're working on, maybe you sit down and write your memoirs, a journal you keep of your adventures, that sort of thing. Anything that engages your mind on something like carving your way through. I keep using jungle as an example because that's what we're running in the campaign right now is jungle. But carving your way through the jungle after a hard day of that, and you're just trying to relax, what do you do? How do you take your mind off of the just drudgery of carving your path through the jungle, trying to find the destination you're looking for, the ancient temple or whatever it is? So having entertainment is really important, and that goes into the morale that I kind of talked about with camp duties that we've been using in the campaign as well. Which is like, once you make camp for the night, there's this opportunity for you guys to each make checks against a DC, and if you succeed, you get some boon from it in the morning. If more people fail than pass, then you get some detriment to it. Usually that's advantage or disadvantage on the energy roll for the next day. But you can also just choose not to do anything. And if you don't, then it's always going to be a straight roll. So it's, do you want to use the morale system? If yes, here's the pros and cons of it. And you can make that decision. And make sure that you track resources. This is a thing that we don't like to do in modern D&D, but it is something that if you track resources, make tracking resources easy, first of all. So make it easy, and something to my notes because I did not have that correct. Make tracking easy. Try to make it engaging. That's what I try to do with a resource die, is try to make it something, like some sort of game. Like there's something the players do. It's not, and another day goes by and you just tick off a box that you used another ration, and we move on from there. Like, let's add a little bit of, let's use the dice. That's how we interpret abstraction, chaos in the world, uncertainty. Let's use it to track the resources. So I do it for ammunition, and it just makes it easier, makes it easy to track, makes it kind of fun to track, and does what I need the resource tracking to do, which is to make things a little bit more difficult and not an automatic. Like, you won't just, if you're a ranger character, let's say, with a classic ranger with a bow, and you decide to go dungeon delving, you're not going to have infinite arrows. There is the potential that you can run out of arrows. And if you run out of arrows, what do you do next? Do you have some sort of melee weapon that you go to? Do you have my backup weapon in these cases? And I always kind of tell people when I'm using the system, if we're going to track ammunition, is that every ranged weapon has ammunition tied to it except the sling. Because we assume that you can just find rocks. And you're always kind of on the lookout for rocks that are the right size for use in your sling. So having a sling as a backup weapon just means that you do have one weapon that has infinite ammo. And that's my trade-off for sling's only doing a d4 damage. Is that the nice thing about a sling is they're cheap to get. They cost almost nothing. They take up basically no room in your pack. And it has essentially infinite ammo. You can use it to hunt if you want to. You can use it to attack threats if you want to. You can use it even for signaling over long distances if you can throw a rock and hit it against something to at least make a sound. So you can do that, or a warning. And of course we talked about tracking your rations and your water. And the energy was something I lighted on a little bit. I've talked about it more. If you want to see an example of it in play, go watch the solo RPG sessions and you can see all that. Essentially with the energy is that I have party do con save at the beginning of the day, and depending on how well they roll depends on how much energy. If you are in therapy land, you might know this as how many spoons you have for a day. And so each thing that you do throughout the day, you spend spoons on. You spend some amount of energy on. And if you roll really poorly, you just don't have a very good day. Maybe you're feeling under the weather. Maybe you're tired or sore or whatever the case is. Maybe you just wake up late. That could also just be the reason. And so you're probably not going to get a lot done today. And then as you hit that threshold, that original threshold, you can push and continue to try to do more things. But as you do, you have to start making active Constitution saving throws every time you try to do some sort of additional activity throughout the day. And if you fail those, you get exhaustion levels. So the campaign I'm running right now, there's kind of a through line that so far is that pretty much since we started, at least one character has pretty much had exhaustion, at least one level of exhaustion the whole time. And two characters in particular have exhaustion quite often more than one. I think they've only gotten up to 3 levels of exhaustion so far. So 3 out of 6, and we're using the 2014 rules for exhaustion. So 3 out of 6. So they haven't made it to near death yet, which is good. But they have made it to the 3rd level, which means that they have disadvantage. They're slowed, and they have disadvantage on all checks, attacks, and saving throws. So any d20 roll. And that's not a good place to be. That's when they're usually like, okay, we definitely need to take a rest. I can't go any further. Because I'm not going to be very useful. Another thing to look for if you're wanting to really revivify this exploration pillar is to let the PCs get lost. If they go into the world, or they go into the dungeons, and their mapping dungeons in the wilderness used to be a major part of the game, and I'd like the players to take a little bit more of that player responsibility on. You do not have 100% accurate information of the world. You don't have a GPS in your pocket. You're going to get lost. It's going to happen. Even the greatest people, adventurers in the world can get lost. Like, it's a relatively easy thing to do. Because eventually they're just going to roll poorly, or they're going to get turned around. And seasoned adventurers will be able to fix that problem very quickly, or mitigate that. But low-level adventurers are going to struggle with that more, and I think that makes sense in the world. That as you adventure longer and longer, the likelihood that you're going to get lost becomes more rare. And in addition to that, when you do get lost, you have ways to mitigate that very easily. You're going to realize you're lost very quickly and be able to make up for that distance and time pretty easily through generally a number of different spells, and or your skill checks are just in general going to be higher, whereas the DCs are still going to stay pretty relative. Just think about this. Dungeons. In dungeons you have more of a risk of wandering monster encounters. That's one of the things where it's bad to get lost in a dungeon. Because it's likely that you're going to have to come across wandering monster encounters. And those are encounters, at least the way that I run them, are very specifically tuned to kind of be a stick instead of a carrot. As a DM tool. You can kind of give them a little whack with the stick. It's like, hey, you guys need to keep moving. This is not a cool place. It's not a fun place to just hang around. You're in the belly of the beast here. The more you guys hang around, the more things you try to do, the more likely it is monsters are going to come upon you in the dungeon. Just as they're moving throughout it, going about their lives. And if that results in a combat, that combat is going to be pretty unrewarding for you. You're not going to get a lot of treasure out of it. You're not going to get a lot of new information out of it. which means that once you're in the dungeon, you actually want to have probably as few combats as you can, and you want to be as quick about the time that you spend in there. It's more of a tactical thought to exploration, where it's like, okay, we can either take a bunch of times checking every 15 feet for traps, which slows us down, which means it's more likely the monsters are going to come across us. And at what point do we choose to be quick and maybe get hit by a trap, or go slow and methodical to ensure we don't get hit by a trap, but it's also more likely that we might run into monsters, or monsters are going to run into us as we spend more time in the dungeon. So it's a balancing act, and that gives them a meaningful choice as to their play style, how the players want to play. They're like, we've got hit points, especially as you get more and more hit points, they might be like, yeah, don't worry about the traps, we're just going to run through the traps. But if we get into a combat encounter, we're going to have to start using spell slots and abilities, and we definitely don't want to do that. Or maybe it's the opposite. That's going to depend on your group and their play style, and how they address these sorts of problems. And sometimes you don't know that until they get in there, and sometimes they don't have a very consistent way of viewing things. Sometimes maybe they're just, the players haven't had combat in a while and they're just spoiling for a fight. Give them a fight. There's no reason not to. And outside the dungeon, when you're running around, it's once you get lost, the world can turn really, really scary if the PCs don't know where, when, and how to find civilization or resupply. If you're tracking those resources, they're like, ooh, we could legitimately run out of food or water. And that is a thing that will kill us, and we can't kill it before it kills us. We can't solve that problem with violence, which I think is probably the keystone for a good thought process around exploration challenges and obstacles, is to provide challenges for your players that generally can't be solved through the means of combat, because that's an entirely different pillar. So these are things that they're going to have to figure out or get around, maybe traverse. A lot of traversal stuff, for the most part. But also investigation things of that nature. But if you get lost out in the world, the monsters are going to be kind of the least of their concern, wandering monsters out in the wilderness. If they're not sure they're going to be able to feed their bellies or find a place to sleep or be able to make a fire if it's, a blizzard's coming or something like that. Monsters become not the scary thing, and the world, just surviving in the world, becomes the scary thing. Or maybe they do run into monsters, and maybe you have a Hoth Tauntaun moment where you're like, I don't know, we killed this big monster, we're gonna crawl inside it and try to sleep through this nasty blizzard, and with the ambient heat of the corpse. That'd be a cool scene. That would definitely be memorable for me. Both running it and if I got to do that as a player, I'd be like, I remember that time, that game in which we cut open, let's say it's like a, I wasn't going to say Bahir. Well, let's just say Bahir. Bahir, and crawled into it. And we snuggled into that and slept through the night because it was really cold. There was a blizzard going outside and we couldn't start a fire. Yeah, I do remember that. That's a weird game. I think if that's what they come away from my game as players, then I think I've at least done something right. If they're like, that was a fun but very weird game. And morale. We talked about this making camp matter. What can the PCs do in camp to keep their gear, bodies, and spirits in tip-top shape? They can, and this is where you get to use all those skills and all those proficiencies and tools and things that often don't get used. They can look at their list of the character sheet if they want to. They can just have an idea too. And I'll help them get to where we figure out what that role will be for whatever they want to do. Right now we have somebody in the campaign I'm running that's very much into their camp utensils. They're definitely channeling lots of Senshi from Dungeon Meshi, and they always want to pull out their cooking utensils and make food. That's super cool. So I'm like, this is a perfect opportunity where you can get a mechanical benefit for the entire party by using your cooking utensils skills, because it's not usually a thing that comes up. But if you have smithing tools, you can repair armor and things like that. Medicine checks to treat blisters or sunburns. Performance to tell stories or instruments to make music and sing songs. Stuff like survival, just choosing a good or bad camping spot that might be helpful. Maybe you pick a bad camping spot and it turns out that it rains overnight and that water washes through into your tents and everybody's miserable when they get up in the morning. And you have that disadvantage on that energy spend, and it just... we're making an engine, a wilderness engine that just kind of runs itself. And one of the things I would encourage is to pull out the DMG and take a look for ways to use rules and mechanics that often don't get used. So we talked about making sure to use sort of the skills and proficiencies that often don't get used, whether that's animal husbandry, vehicle proficiencies, herbalism kits, even though that one comes up pretty quickly, navigation tools, cartography tools, calligraphy tools. Maybe they make write a nice poem or a journal entry, or notate music. Maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're making a musical composition. They could be doing that. But also use some of the other rules and mechanics that also don't get pulled out a lot. Figuring out how crafting can work in the game. So maybe they take a camp day in the wilderness, or they take a free day and they're like, we're not going to move today, so we're going to stay in camp because we have somebody who's resting up because of exhaustion. And the other people are like, all right, well, we got 24 hours to sit around. What are we going to do? Well, why don't we craft some stuff? And you make a crafting check and have that be a consistent thing that the character works on throughout as they travel through the campaign. Use other things like diseases. Start looking at how to, the same way that we track resources, look at tracking things like encumbrance. I like the Starfinder Pathfinder 2 variant encumbrance a lot. I haven't moved that over to something like D&D, but we could definitely do that. It's pretty easy. Most of it's going to be one-to-one if you use the Pathfinder 2 stuff, because all that gears we can just assume is the same. So that's something I could look at doing, because I do like the idea of providing rewards that are difficult sometimes to manage. Very rarely are they going to come across large stashes of just like coins and or big gems that are very easy and pocketable wealth. Other times it's going to be like, there's some really nice lumber that's probably worth quite a bit of money if you find the right person who will buy lumber, but also you have to transport a bunch of lumber. And how are you going to do that? So wealth that becomes a little bit more difficult to manage, and not giving them things like a bag of holding, which absolutely just happens in, I feel like, almost every campaign where we just like, we don't want to deal with encumbrance, so here's a bag of holding. That's not a bad way to play, but when it becomes kind of the, I don't like that that's kind of the baseline. Like, that's the standard rather than the exception. Is that, oh yeah, everybody has a magic item that just deals with that. Every party in the world. Using exhaustion, which I already talked about, using the foraging rules, making sure that you're familiar with things like the light rules for vision. So light, cover, concealment, use those. Have lots of fogs and mists and heavy rains and foliage, and it's difficult to see things. And making sure that you're using dark vision correctly. Kind of lean into those aspects to make the world, like, sometimes the world's just kind of difficult to get through, and that can really add a flair, especially for some of the other aspects of the game, like combat encounters. Well, if you know the light, concealment, and cover rules pretty well, that can make a huge change in the way that you do combats as to how easy it is to hit things, how the party and the bad guys use things like cover to shoot at each other, and they play smart and tactfully. And they use things like concealment. Or when you're building an encounter, you start looking at things like monsters that have specific types of senses, like maybe they have tremor sense. Okay, so now I'm thinking about concealment a lot more. So how do I put them in an environment in which that tremor sense is a boon to them and is maybe detrimental to the rest of the party who doesn't have tremor sense? Oh, well, there's a bunch of large undergrowth, so it's really hard to see around here, but there are monsters that are hunting in this area because they're exceptionally good at doing it, because they can just feel the seismic tremor sense of you guys walking around, and so they can track you very easily, but it's very difficult for you to track those types of creatures. So just those sorts of things, and it spills over into these other pillars outside of exploration. Also look at magic items. The weirder the better. Folding boat's one of my favorites. It doesn't get used at all, like ever, but it's a really cool magic item. I like it. I think it's cool. That's a super useful... I want to run and play a game in which items like that are useful. And so that's what I do. I look at a magic item and be like, okay, what is a circumstance in which this would be like the solution for that? And let's build something around that, and then potentially I just give you that magic item that kind of solves this for future situations in which this would also be a potential solution. When we talked about the proficiencies, resting, specifically looking at variant resting, I like some of the gritty realism rules. I like to expand. I generally do that for journeys though, not for exploration. But looking at things like variance resting, where you decide, oh well, maybe a long rest is actually 24 hours instead of 8 hours. So it's not just sleeping. It's like you need a day in which you don't really do anything, a recovery day. A Sabbath of sorts. Then looking into things like the swimming and drowning rules, travel pace, variant ability and proficiency mixing. This is one of the rules that I just use bog standard for 5e in 2024. Is the ability to mix and match skills and tools in those proficiency lists with the ability score list. So not having things like performance always being tied to charisma. Well, maybe you want to do a feat of strength. Okay, that sounds like strength plus performance roll. Maybe you're doing some sort of tumbling act. That would be a dexterity acrobatics roll. If you want a constitution performance, maybe like, I believe it's Japan, where they have like that's where it's most famous, but they do it all over. Where they have like the belly slapping, red belly slapping things, where it's like a feat of constitution, let me perform this, or the person who gets shot with a cannonball, that sort of thing, like laying on a bed of nails. These could all be fun constitution performance things. Let's see, what would be intelligence performance? Would be, that might be something that's maybe like more of a mentalist kind of thing, where it's not necessarily sleight of hand, but a way like a logic trick or something to mess with somebody. Maybe something like that. That one's a little bit more hard. And then wisdom performance. Ooh, what would wisdom performance be? It could be telling a story. Like if you were going to tell like some sort of parable, that could be, I could see that as being something like wisdom performance. Sharing like an old parable. Making that, because the emphasis is on as much entertaining as it is teaching the lesson, which is wisdom, right? That's kind of the base, the root of wisdom is an ability score. So maybe you do that. And one of the things we definitely want to avoid is the WotC Ranger design problem. Instead of being better at, and by that problem I mean, if we look at how the Rangers designed and how they do in the wilderness, rather than being better than other classes at being in the wilderness, they often just do things. So they remove roles, which actually removes the player's engagement with the game. So instead of just being better at doing something than everybody else is, like stealth for a rogue is probably the closest analogy. You're just like, oh, we just don't have to deal with that because of my class. Which isn't a super fun play experience. So we don't want to do things that just allows you to auto-win. As a rough analogy, think about what if you were a fighter and every time a combat came up, you were like, I hit the X button to win combat. Would you say that that was a fulfilling combat? If that was a video game, would you be happy with that if you were playing a fighter and like instead of just being a really cool fighter who's better at fighting than other people, you were like, oh, you actually just don't do any of the fight scenes. You just auto win those. That's not very fun. So we don't want that design. So that's the one pitfall that's very easy to avoid. All right, so we talked about it a little bit. I kind of gave a few examples, but I do want to give an easy way to create an exploration challenge, just right off the bat. This will be your takeaway point, I think. It's a thing that I find useful. So let's say that you're building some sort of survival thing. They're going out into the wilderness. They're trying to get to that ancient temple, let's say. And you're like, all right, well, I want them to do some things while they're out here. So, what kind of challenges do I want to make? So grab your books or D&D Beyond, open your books, and flip to a magic item or a magic spell. Try to choose one that's not like a popular go-to, like don't choose Fireball. Choose something that's not necessarily... well, I was going to say, choose a spell that's not a popular go-to option. We'll just go with that. Like I said, let's choose one. Let's choose, because we want to do an item and we want to do a spell. Okay, let's choose an easy example. For item, let's go with cast off armor. That's that's an armor that doesn't get picked up a lot because people don't use it because it does a very specific thing. And for a spell, let's do... You know what? I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, and I think I've got a metric ton of gaseous form spell scrolls. So let's go with gaseous form. Alright, so take those ideas, take your magic item or spell, and imagine a situation where that specific item or magic spell would be the answer to that challenge. So construct a scenario in which they'd be like, if you had this thing right now, this is a non-issue. Okay, so let's do an example. So cast off armor. Okay, so with a cast off armor, you can take off a suit of armor with only an action instead of, especially with heavier armor, multiple minutes. Okay, so we need a situation where taking off your armor would be very important. If we were a combat encounter, that'd be something like a, I don't know, like a rust monster encounter. That'd be a fun thing. It'd be like, oh, you just hit the button and the paladin's armor falls off. so it doesn't get eaten by the rust monster. But in an exploration context, let's go with the heavy armor, medium or heavier armor. So let's focus in on that. Well, 50 pounds or more of armor plus any gear you're wearing makes swimming pretty much impossible for the average person. So sometimes the simplest thing is just put some water in their path. That is an easy way. That's a quick fix for exploration. Just throw some water in the PC's path, because D&D doesn't typically give you a lot of great options to deal with water, especially at lower levels. Okay, so let's go with deep water, like some sort of gorge or something, and have a classic rickety rope bridge across it. Sure, perfect. So it's rickety, so it's more likely to break on PCs that are wearing medium and heavier armor. Okay, because those are the people we're kind of targeting specifically with this challenge. So if somebody falls in, if it's like the rogue wearing like studded leather, they're probably not going to have much issue swimming to the shore. But if the paladin in full plate with big shield falls into the water, they're going to sink like a rock to the bottom. And maybe not be able, so we need water that's deep enough to go over their head. We could also maybe add like a hefty current. If we want to make pulling in the water at least a small challenge for the rogue. Somebody like the rogue or the ranger or barbarian, something like that. So it's like there's always an option they could get swept away. Pretty unlikely. But if we also throw the paladin or somebody like that with that, or a fighter with full plate down there, and they're underwater, and perhaps that keeps pushing them downstream, and once that inertia gets going, it's real hard for them to stop, so maybe they have disadvantage if they try to swim against the current. And maybe we have them hit some rocks or debris, and that forces them to make a Constitution saving throw, kind of like a concentration check. Or they lose the breath, they get the breath knocked out of them, and they start actively drowning. So that's a very specific situation. Now, here's the thing, is that the paladin or whoever it is could just make the save, and then that never becomes an encounter, a real issue. You kind of have to be okay with that, unless you're going to make it like a multi-stage check thing where they need to make like 3 dexterity saves as they move across the bridge. I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably do 1 and done. I might give them 2. Maybe 2. Maybe 1 to get for the first half and 1 for the second half. If I really want them to fall in the water, maybe I have something else planned for down there. So I really want this option that, or something they can only find if they get in the water. If there's a little treat at the end of that, they come across a washed up drowned body, or maybe they find a cave entrance, or, you know, give them, you can also give them something fun for failing as well. So our next example, we said gaseous form. Alright, so gaseous form. That's a pretty easy one. It turns your body into gas. So anything that requires a tight space to move through would be a perfect example. Gaseous form, because I was just looking at it, gives you advantage on multiple saves. I think all your physical saves. So strength, con, dex. And it does give you a fly speed. A slow fly speed. I think it's 10 feet? 10 or 15 feet. Now you could create a, let's say like a crumbling cavern the PCs need to cross, and as they do, rocks and stalactites kind of rain down on them. And be like, okay, well if we had gaseous form, that really, we'd have advantage on all those saves, and I'd probably even give them resistance to BSP damage for being kind of like a swarm. So that would make it easy if they had that very specific spell to get through that. I might even be like, oh, the exit is on a raised ledge that's maybe like 10 to 20 feet up. Like, it's not a big thing, but it is like, oh, you might also have to spend an extra round in here climbing up there. But if you had the gaseous form, and you could just fly up there, like, diagonally across the chamber, maybe, like, not an issue at all in this room. Now, the likelihood that somebody has prepared gaseous form, or even is capable of performing it at this level, is probably unlikely, but they might have similar things. So maybe they cast Fly or Spider Climb, and then they're like, okay, well now at least we don't have the extra time spending on the ledge. Maybe they have a resistance spell against the falling debris that they can use. They have some sort of teleport, Misty Step, a dimension door, or something like that they can use to get across. So we've set up a situation in which they can use a lot of different ways to get across it. And that was very easy to build off because we just took something that already existed in the game and designed a scenario in which that would be the easiest answer. And then it's up to the players to figure out how to get there. And that's the way that I like to do it. I find that really easy way to do it. That's kind of everything I wanted to talk about with the exploration pillar and kind of revivifying, giving you all these tools, like I said, all these sort of knobs that we can pull on the organ. And we can pick on our players a little bit and have them focus on things that they really, really take for granted in the game, which is a great way to kind of get them interested in the exploration side of the game as well. Like, oh, well, you guys didn't think about this? Which, of course, as players, you sit there and go, that's a really common sense thing. I probably should have thought about that, but we didn't. And now we kind of pay the price. So maybe next time we take some extra supplies with us. Maybe we decide to get the mule. Maybe I'll definitely prep gaseous form. That's actually a very useful spell. I'd never really thought about it, but that would be the perfect spell for this situation. And that design works really well. It's at its best when a player's looking down at their prep spells, like a wizard or cleric is looking at their prep spells and like, you know, I have the spell. If I just prepped it today, we'd be fine. I didn't prep it. Or if we had this spell, it'd be the perfect solution to this situation, but we don't have it, and it's just like, ah! And that can be a fun thing as a player, for players. Be like, we know what the answer is, we just don't have the ability to do the easy answer. So now we have to improvise a way around it. Which is fun. So tell me about your experience with the exploration pillar. How do you use it in your games? Do you also have trouble making it matter as a part of your game? Or is it something that you've found your own solution to? If you have, you know, comment down below, let me know. and share it with the other dungeon masters, game masters out there, what you found that works for you, or challenges that you come up against, and make it sort of a conversation where we can kind of figure out how to make the exploration pillar matter a lot more in our games, because we know that it's clear we're not going to get that support from WotC. We're not going to get that from either D&D or derivative D20 systems for sure to support those non-combat parts of the game very well. But that's it for me on this one. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright? Bye. Alright, yeah, I'm actually going to do one more. Let's go ahead and do the node-based travel. That took a little bit longer than I wanted to, but let's go ahead and do it. We'll knock it out. It'll be done. Or, you know what? No, I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it. We're already at, like... I've already been going... The stream's about 2 hours plus. We'll hang out for a little bit. How about that? Let's just hang out. I'm going to do that. Let's start over chatting. So, I'm just going to mark down that we did that one. We'll move on from there. We'll just hang out for a little bit, maybe here for another 10-15 minutes. Just kind of chill. If you guys have questions, drop them in the chat. Take a look at them. Otherwise, I'm just going to... I'll pull up some questions. We'll do some talking. How about that? I'm just going to make a nice line. One of the things that I do not like about Google Docs is that they hide the strike through option from the main bar. There we go. Found it. And I can never remember the keyboard shortcut for it. Oh well. Alright. Yeah, no, game last night went well. They did turn out to abandon the dungeon. I'll talk about this more when I do the session 4 recap behind the screen. But they did decide to abandon the dungeon, which sucks. Spent a lot of time on the minutes of the Heavenly Pit, which is the adventure, the little dungeon. But like I said earlier in the stream, I could save that for if they ever come back to it. If not, I'll just save it for, I don't know, maybe the next campaign I run. I'll make that the initial dungeon in it. Something I'd like to get to at the point, find a way around it, is to take some of that stuff, take these notes for things like these dungeons, and put it together and put it up for you guys to get a hold of too. In a way, I just need to clean it up so it's actually legible and usable for somebody who's not me, with my lots of my own shorthand and stuff like that in it. To clean up some of that stuff. But let's see. Nope. Okay. There we go. Take a second. Alright, we got there. We got there. It's fine. Let's take a look at some questions. Let's get us some prompts real quick. Just looking up some stuff. Take a look at. Alright, just look at it. Oh, there we go. Nice little list of common stumbling blocks for new dungeon masters. I think that's a nice, easy thing to end this on going out in the stream with. Look at some of these. Over preparing and or under preparing. Yeah, that's the common one. I don't know. That's really tough for somebody who's a brand new dungeon master to tell you what is the right amount of prep for you. It's sort of something you just kind of have to learn. I think in the beginning it's very likely the Dungeon Master or Game Master is going to over-prepare rather than under-prepare. Just because they're not sure about their improv skills yet. And they don't feel like they have an improv support system, which is something you have to learn and spend some time just kind of figuring out to do. So you kind of have to get into that, and it's really just bears out through experience. Like, I know from experience about how much prep I need to do for a single session of something like D&D. I know, and that of course varies by the group, by every group that you run for, and the type of adventure you're running. I know for me, about a page and a half of typed prep is about all I need per session. That's about it. That's about what my current group gets through. So, but I also have things like, sitting in front of me, this guy, which is my Dungeon Master. Instead of a binder, it's a folder. But it has a lot of improv tables and things that help me with that aspect of the game. Everything from rules clarifications in the front about conditions and things like that. I have a GM Oracle, which I will probably take out in the next time I edit this up, because I just know by heart now. There's things like I can make improvised traps or hazards on the fly, some random dungeon encounters players might run into, the encounter quick matchups if I need to make a combat encounter on the fly, dungeon dressing. I have a lot of dungeon dressing and wilderness dressing. I talked about it a little bit earlier with the exploration phases of rolling for random encounters. And depending on what system you play, a D6 is pretty common for rolling random encounters, but I use a D12. On a 1, it's likely you're going to run into a combat encounter or some other form of creature encounter. Usually combat, not always. Depends on kind of how you approach it and what makes sense for their reaction. And then on the flip side, if you roll a 12, you get generally some sort of dressing. So let's say you're going through the mountains. Number 7, you find a cave or overhang. You decide to go into that cave. Well, if I've prepped my improv resources the way that I usually do, you're like, oh, we found the cave and we're going to enter the cave. I'll be like, okay, is that cave going to be anything more than just a cave? Is it maybe a dungeon? I have my little parachute file in the back, which is usually like 3 relevant 1-page dungeons or 5-room dungeon kind of things that I set up, and then one of them will probably, if I know they're traveling through the mountains and hills area, one of them is probably cave based or has a cave opening in it, and I might decide, yeah, let's go ahead and do a full dungeon. Or maybe I'm like, it's only a 1 or 2 chamber thing, and maybe it's an animal den, maybe there's nothing worth finding in there, maybe it's like the troll cave from Hobbit and they find a whole bunch of like elven loot in there. There's all sorts of fun stuff you can find in there. And that would just be a randomly, and I feel confident doing that now as a dungeon master, but if I was a brand new dungeon master, you'd be like, ooh, I don't know, I'm basically making a dungeon kind of on the fly. That's kind of difficult. And so it seems like pretty advanced dungeon mastering, or game mastering. But you learn to prep. There's the old Jim Davis saying is that you prep anything that you're not prepared to improvise, which I think is the closest we can get to what is kind of an objective truth for the level of prep you need. To not over prepare, under prepare is like, if you don't feel comfortable improvising that, or it's not, or you expect this to come up and you wouldn't feel comfortable improvising it, then that's something you prepare. So for some DMs, that's a list of names, because if somebody asks for the name, they get called out on the spot and they're like, right now for the current campaign, they've been asking, I think, every NPC for their name, which is generally not something that I'm prepared for. Usually I find that my players usually don't ask NPCs for their names. But this time they decided to ask just about everybody for their name. And so I have a roll table that we can roll on, and I just do it in front of them. They're like, okay, you asked this person for their name. I don't know what their name is yet. We're going to find it out together. That's okay. Usually I'll let them roll. I'll let them roll the die for the table, and I'll just look up the result on the table, and they can tell me what the name of the character is. It's just, you know, let the players roll dice. If the option is you roll the die or the players roll the die, I like to let the players roll the die, even if they don't know what they're rolling for. That way they feel like they are the arbiters of their own fate in some strange way. So yeah, that's it for over-preparing and under-preparing. Figure out what's important to you per session. I have, I think, in here. I don't know if it's still in here. I may have taken it out, because I didn't need it at the moment. I do have this. So it's a D&D session sheet. So it's just my own like session prep thing where it's like, alright, give me some bullet points about the last session. And we start off with the recap. And usually I let I don't spit out the recap. We kind of popcorn storytell it and be like, okay, what happened last time? Yes, that happened. The person's like, oh, this also happened. I'm like, oh, remember that actually this happened. That's not quite correct. Things like that. And then a purposeful start, you know, get the party moving quickly with whatever's they're going to next. Don't let them mill around too much and waste a whole bunch of session time. I outline the most likely to occur encounters. Usually I try to end each session knowing specifically what they're going to do the next session, so I know what to prep. And then you go, okay, I know the only encounter I really have control over in the Dungeon Master is the very first scene of where we pick up the session. And that's the only one I have control over. After that, their choices set whatever the next scenes are going to be. But I can prep what I think are the most likely to occur encounters. And depending on how many players and how fast your group goes through stuff will tell you kind of how many encounters or challenges that you need to prep. Usually it's somewhere between 3 to 5. That's about it for a session of play, for a standard session of play, depending on how many people are in your group and how fast your group runs. And what type of challenges they are, because combats will obviously take longer than any other sort of challenge usually. And then just some basics about what those encounters are. And then I have my list of 5 to 7 inter-scene fluff or interactions, just random stuff they can come across. I talked about it. I can tell you something that's on one of these last session ones, just to give you an idea. Inter-scene fluff, number 1, you find a trash pit with pots, pans, and question mark, maybe something else if they go digging for it, in a debris pile. It's like a trash heap, a midden pile. You see smoke on the horizon, that's another one. Do you go investigate the smoke on the horizon? Do I know what that is? Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out together if you decide to go after it. And again, these are supposed to be small things, so they might find... They decide to follow the smoke, and maybe I decide to use one of these other ones. You find 1d4 messengers at a campsite. So that's the smoke you saw is from their campfire, and there's one or more messengers sitting around having a camp while they're on their way between different towns, delivering messages and packages and things of that nature. Other thing, a tree with glass shards or bottles circled by thick briar hedge. Like they have shards of glass and bottles that are hanging off limbs of the tree, branches of the tree. What does that mean? I don't know. Do you go investigate it? Okay, then we're going to figure out what it means. If you figure it out. Because here's the thing, I don't have to make anything up if you guys blow your religion check or nature check or whatever check you're making. You're like, you have no idea what this thing is. And that can be an appropriate response. It's like, hey, you don't know. Do you want to mess with it more to find out? Maybe. That might make something or someone angry. Maybe not. It's up to you. And that's sort of the way that I run the game. Is like, yeah, there's a bunch of player choice. You guys can decide to do things. You can decide not to do things. It's whatever. Other common missteps for new dungeon masters. Difficulty with the rules. Ooh. Yeah. Rules are difficult. System mastery is not needed to be a dungeon master. For sure. You do have to kind of understand the core mechanic. That helps a lot. That's probably the one thing you for sure need to know. But yeah, I would go with sort of the things that I have on this. Probably first 1 to 2 pages that are kind of in my DM guide is the things that I would consider to be things that a new DM for sure needs to know, or have an ability to look it up. Having a quick reference is really nice. Just print out a front and back sheet or something like that to have it with you for just general rules that you're going to need to look up rather than trying to find them in the book every single time until you're familiar with them and know them by heart. Which, if you keep running, you will likely do. So, difficulty with the rules. Yeah, not knowing things. So you got to know the core mechanic, the D20 test, the difference between a check, a saving throw, and an attack roll. You know the difference between those three and how they're used. That's probably the most basic thing that you're going to need to know. Other things that are in here, like knowing the combat actions is really useful. So I have a list of them in here. Attack, cast, dash, disengage, dodge, escape, grapple, help, hide, ready, search, shove, stabilize, use ability, or object. So it's always helpful to be like, what are you doing this turn? Are you not sure? You could always try to help somebody. Things like that. Conditions. Know the basic conditions like grappled and being prone. Those are the ones that come up the most, as well as poisoned and frightened are probably the ones that come up the most. So if you get those down pretty pat, the other ones come up, but usually they don't come up nearly as often. I have the cover rules down here. I don't think the cover rules or concealment or light rules are super necessary for a new DM to roll with. I think that's kind of trends into that next step in the evolution of your DM's journey, is understanding things like cover, concealment, and light, and how you can use those as tools for you and for and against the player characters. But yeah, I don't think as a brand new person you need to worry too much about those. That wouldn't be my necessary focus. If you want to have torches burning in every dungeon, so everybody always has light, that's fine. I don't think there's any issue with that, especially in the beginning. Now, if every dungeon throughout the campaign always has some sort of ambient light in it, it gets a little weird. If the player characters never have to deal with light sources. But yeah, in the beginning, you don't need to worry about that stuff. Exhaustion. I don't really like the 2024 rules for exhaustion. The redo on exhaustion, I think the 2014 rules are a lot better and a lot more useful. They're nice to know, I guess. I'm not even sure I say that. If you're going to do a lot of exploration-based stuff, I'd say get to know them, as well as understanding improvised damage numbers and how to make a DC. Those three things together will get you a long way. Exhaustion kind of puts you in the mindset of how else what other consequences can I give to the player characters that aren't straight hit point damage? And if you can get yourself out of that hit point damage land, which is very easy to fall into as a new dungeon master or game master, that the only way that you can provide consequences for the party in world is through hit point damage. If you can break that hold outside of the combat only mindset, the game really opens up to you. You have the ability to do a lot of cool stuff and a lot of different things and really be creative with it. As a new DM, I'd say definitely get a GM Oracle. Understand how to use that. I have that D21 if you want to see how it's used. You can go watch the solo RPG sessions where I use it all the time to do solo play. I still use it quite a bit. I pretty much use it in every session that I run. Because sometimes players just ask me questions and I'm like, I don't know what the answer to that is. and I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. So instead of just using any brain power to decide what that should be, I'll just roll a die. I'll ask you a yes or no question. Is this true? Yes or no? Roll the die. Sometimes I'll have them roll the die. So yeah, I get a GM Oracle. I think that helps a lot build the improvising. Build that improviser muscle that we talked about being over-prepared or unprepared. It's extremely helpful for that. And takes a lot of this idea away that you have to know everything all the time. Instead of be like, I don't know, and I'm going to let the dice tell me. I might have an idea of whether that's true or not in the world, and if I have a strong idea, a strong gut feeling, I'll go with that. If I don't have a strong gut feeling, yeah, just let the dice decide. And it's also, sometimes we don't talk about as a dungeon master or game master, but it is also perfectly alright to be like, I don't know. Let's table that for now, and I'm going to write down a note, and I'm going to think about that in between this session and the next session, and I'll have an answer for you. If that's something you can do that with. If they asked about something specific about the lore or something about the world, and you're like, I don't know, and I need to think about that for a minute. It's perfectly okay to be like, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I will get back to you with an answer. Let me think about it in between sessions. What else is down here? Knowing the proficiencies, that's very helpful. Being able to make a good combat encounter, but that's really not rules-based. In fact, it's in antithesis to rules-based. And yeah, I think know the rules as written and run them kind of as written until you get that firm base. And try to keep things as easy as possible and keep the game flowing. Don't worry too much about... I try not to worry too much about hitting the letter of the rules, but rather that raw version of the rules, but the RAI version, the rules as intended, what I think the rules are trying to do. And if I think I have a good understanding of what the rules are trying to do, I can put my adjudication of whatever situation it is, whatever thing that I'm trying to judge, in alignment with what I think the intent of the rules is. And if I do that, and I do that consistently, the game should feel pretty consistent. You don't have to worry too much about improvising versus not improvising, or making a call that's wrong. Be like, oh, well, I would think that it would work like this, but maybe it doesn't. And it's okay to be wrong about that stuff too. And let's be... yeah, down here on the list is not being prepared for player creativity. That's the being underprepared part, is finding a way to prepare yourself with aids that will help you improvise situations. And take notes. Notes really help. Because then it'll give you an idea of the things you need to work on. Or the things that, if you make notes about the things that caught you unawares that you didn't know what to do with, and you make notes of that in between sessions and you review those notes, you can be like, okay, make sure that I prep something for the situation like this, or something that will help me improvise a situation like this in the future. This is really helpful. And then let's do just one more, and then we'll be done. Managing player expectations. Why is that a stumbling block? Expect a story-driven campaign with intricate plots, while the DM may be more comfortable with a sandbox or improv style. Yeah, I think, honestly, I'm right in the middle of this right now. Because I'm playing the game that I am running for. I think that all the players in it, for the most part, not everybody, some people have some outside experience, but for the most part, their only experience with D&D is 2014 and later. And a lot of their specifics, I think, exploration has been through this group, with the other sort of prime dungeon master who's been running in the group has a much more narrative, story-driven focus on their campaign, or their only understanding of the game and how it's played is from big streamers like a Critical Role kind of situation, which is very, very story-driven campaign. Again, with those intricate plots and very strong player characters. And so how do you manage player expectations, especially if you are a DM that's more comfortable with sandbox or improv style? Here's the thing is that I don't think any new, what I would consider a newbie DM at this point, is probably comfortable with the sandbox or improv style. For the same over-prepared, under-prepared reason. I'm not sure if this is truly a new DM problem. I think this is more of a problem for a DM that's sort of like in a situation like I am, where I've been playing and running for many, many, many years. More than, let's say, more than one edition of D&D. Let's say that's how long. Pre-2014. At the very least. So, I think that's more of an issue for me because you have new players that have a different idea of what D&D is and what their play style is compared to maybe my own, which is a little bit more freewheeling sandbox improv style, where it's like, yeah, I can make a big plot, but I really like it. It's you guys are the player characters. I kind of want you to decide to focus on the things that you want to be important in the game for you. So, if you choose a direction, I will build out something for that direction, but I do want you guys to make that effort to be like, this is the thing we're interested in going after, this is the thing that our player characters want to do. These are the goals that we set up for ourselves, both collectively and individually. Don't worry about focusing on that. So... Again, yeah, I don't think it's really a newbie problem. I think it's more of a me problem. Yeah, so it's about being able to contextualize how the game is going to go and communicate that to the players. Ideally, in the session 0 preamble, maybe when you do the campaign pitch, make it very clear about what you're trying to do. And that it will probably be very different, because I think that's been a bit of the sticker shock for a lot of the players. A lot of the players I've run short things for, like 1 shots or 1 or 2 shots, things like that, but I haven't really done a full campaign for this group, or any sort of longer adventure for this group. And so they haven't really seen the difference in, say, my style versus our other sort of primary Dungeon Master style. And very different, right? They run a very kind of more story-driven narrative kind of game that's a little bit, I don't want to say railroad, because railroad has all these weird negative connotations to it. It's slightly more linear, like it's very clear what the goal is and where to go, very obviously. And that's in a difference with me, where a lot of my games are like, here's the place in which you find yourselves. We have done a lot of work on who your player characters are. Each of you have some sort of agenda you guys have thrown in together to get to this place and build some bonds where you kind of know each other. And it's up to you guys to kind of decide how you guys will work together to be successful going after your own individual goals, where you can lean on the party to help you with things, but also decide what is important to you as a collective group to go after. So I'm going to throw you kind of in the middle of the world, and I'll throw a bunch of different adventure seeds at you to see what you kind of strike on, what bait you strike, and we'll go from there. And I think that has been the thing that's been a little bit, I guess frustrating is the right word, and that makes it seem bad though. It's been because sometimes frustrated, sometimes just funny to watch this group of players kind of decide not to go on adventures, on a lot of adventures, or give up on adventures, which is very in the middle of them, which is very interesting. And I said earlier that in the stream that I think for me it's a lot of, I need to probably pull back again. I've made the world a little bit too daunting, perhaps, where they feel like they're kind of backed into a corner. So maybe I need to give them some easy wins. So that's something I'm going to look at, maybe introduce to them, because I think that they're getting gun shy going going into the world and doing things, because the world has the first 4 sessions or so kind of been kicking them around. So it's time to give them an opportunity to kick something in the world. So we'll do that. That's the sort of thing. So that's why I'm doing, managing player expectations. So yeah, I was very clear with them up front about the campaign. Be like, hey, you can go in the world. Also, the world's not leveled necessarily for level 1 PCs. So you need to be pretty cognizant about what you pick and choose to do, which I think has also been part of the gun-shy part. Because there is an option, we talk about the giants that they're well aware of. It's like, if you go mess with the giants are going to smoke you, and you're a first level party. They're not, you're just going to be dead if you get into some sort of combat with them. Or try one of these large adventures, but also there are spaces in which for you to adventure that are level appropriate areas. And Heavenly Pits was one of those areas. They have decided to abandon that quest after one difficult combat. Their first and most difficult, and yet at the same time easiest combat so far in the campaign. I really wanted them to get the combat in that 4th session, and they got it. And then decided, we don't want to do this anymore. This thing's going to kill us. This adventure's going to kill us. So, like I said, I probably need to pull back a little bit and make things just a little bit easier for a little bit. To rebuild their confidence. Give them an up note. I think they've probably had a few too many downbeats pacing wise, so I need to give them some upbeats. Some molehills to conquer before they go trying to climb the mountain again. And that's really just a note for me. But yeah, I don't think managing player expectations is particularly as important for new dungeon masters. I think especially coming in here, because I think that players expect that story-driven campaign with intricate plots, but I think new DMs who are coming to the hobby also come from those same sort of entry points into the hobby that the players do, so I think that they're kind of generally on the same page about that. Unless you're playing with a group of experienced players who've been playing for a long time who are not into that style of play and you're trying to run for them, then yeah, you're going to have might be a little bit of a tone shift, and so you just need to be clear with that up front. So I just tried to be clear with them. The PCs is like, you guys voted, I have a little thing that I went with them, and it's like the responses I got is people wanted a more player-driven game. I was like, alright, well this is a player-driven game, but you guys have to drive it, is kind of the thing. And they're not doing a ton of that right now. So, but that's for me to figure out. There's another bastard. So, we'll get that figured out. But, that's gonna be it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Always fun. Gonna talk about this stuff. Hopefully you got something useful out of it. If so, of course, leave a comment down below. Share some of your experiences. If you have other questions, you can drop those in, and I'll try to answer them in the questions. If it's a particularly squirrely one, maybe I'll make a full video. We'll dive into it and explain it a little bit more if it's not a super easy answer. What else? Well, if you like the content or this is your first time here, hey, thanks for checking out the channel. There is the little like and subscribe down at the bottom if you want to catch more of this. We have the solo RPG session. We have, we're kind of doing this DM behind the screen look. If you want to see what it's like as a dungeon master prepping, looking at their prep and looking at what happened during the session and what parts of the prep they used or didn't use and things they need to change and adjust for because of the player's actions. I think that's super useful to look at how other dungeon masters prep and run their games and what they get out of it and the choices they make. I think that's super helpful to help you kind of find your own style in the way of being the best dungeon master or game master that you can be, and finding out because each one of our paths on this journey is totally individual. My style and the way that I play and run games is completely different from anybody else at the same table's individual style. And so that's just a part of the wonder of being a dungeon master, is that you get to sit in the control seat at the control panel and make the decisions about the type of game that you want to play in, and that you want your players, your friends around you to experience. But that's it. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys real soon, though. All right? Talk to you next time. Bye bye.